Hi everyone again. Thank you for tuning into this session today, and thank you Samit and the Autodesk team for organizing this. As you can guess from the event title, I'm going to talk about Bifrost. I'm actually quite excited about how Bifrost has been shaping up over the last few years. You would have typically heard of Bifrost in the context of effect simulation, but today my focus, as Samit said, is going to be about using Bifrost beyond your typical effects tasks and creating truly procedural and non-destructive workflows. But before I dive into the session, a quick introduction about myself to set some background context for the audience. So first, a disclaimer. Although this session is titled as Meet the Expert and Masterclass, and it's very kind of Autodesk to oversell me, but I do not claim to be a master of anything. In fact, if anything, even after 15 years of being in this industry, I'm still learning every day, and which is exactly why I'm doing this session today to share my learnings about Bifrost with you. I started in CG as a lighting artist and also did a bit of render angling in my initial few months at Prana Studios. I quickly learned my way into different departments like environment creation, shader writing, tools development, scripting, and I eventually grew into a creative and technical leadership role over various projects. My longest role at Prana, where I headed the production technology and pipeline department, was involved in solving some very interesting challenges for many different media formats, and my most recent role was as a CG supervisor at Framestore London. I do like to dabble in street photography and music whenever I can, so I've left my social media handles here in case you want to give me a follow. And if there are any students tuning into this session today, given the kind of year this has been and the kind of state our industry is in, I would like to still encourage them to keep on learning every day and persevere, and your hard work will get you there soon. So, but what exactly is Bifrost? Right? Uh, you might know that it borrows its name from this mythical Norse bridge that I'm sure everyone has heard of. Thor, Bifrost. So, like its namesake, I also think that Bifrost acts like a bridge. It basically bridges the gap between our creative intent and our technical capabilities to realize that creative intent. Uh, Many years ago, Autodesk had acquired this piece of software called Naiad by Exotic Matter. At that point in time, it was a really high-end simulation solver for simulating extremely detailed water sims. And around the same time, Autodesk also acquired Softimage, which had this amazing procedural environment, node-based environment called ICE. So Bifrost, although Autodesk may have taken some time to bring it to us in its current state, I truly believe that Bifrost actually combines the best of both worlds. Now, all that is great, but if you go online as a new user and you do a quick Google search for Maya Bifrost, you would typically see a lot of results that are mostly talking about effect simulation, right? So you see all the images out here are for effects like water, oceans, volumes, clouds, fire, snow, explosion. So mostly effects oriented. But I'm going to cover something different today. I'm going to show how Bifrost can be used for non-effects oriented tasks as well, which have absolutely nothing to do with simulations. But before we go into that, what I would like is a quick audience poll. It would be interesting to know how many of you are purely artists who do not really have a technical background or do not know programming, versus some of you may be artists who do dabble in programming, and some of you may actually be pure pipeline TDs or support TDs or developers who are fairly comfortable with programming and maths and things of that nature. I believe Samit would have flashed a poll.
Yeah, so the poll question is flashed on your screen, guys. If you identify yourself in any of these three categories, please select one of them so that Sachin and we will have a clear idea on what kind of audience you guys are, and the direction or the language of the the webinar would be based on the kind of audience which we have.
Right. Thank you, Samit. I do see a lot of.
Sachin, you would also be putting the poll responses in the poll
Sure.
section on your panel.
Yeah, yeah,
Sure.
yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
So I can see 24% of people are, I mean, the voting is still going on, but the highest one is an artist without programming experience, which is 51%. 23% of people are saying that an artist with programming experience, and 26 says they're pipeline TDs or a developer. So that's nice. Awesome,
Nice. So
awesome.
it's a good mix, right? I do see a lot of
Yeah.
familiar names, old friends and colleagues, and some new friends. So hi to all of those people. You know who you are. Moving on. So I mentioned that Bifrost bridges the gap between our creative intent and technical capability. Now, how does it do that? It does that by offering us a completely visual programming platform, right? So typically in the past, when you had to solve a technical problem or develop a custom tool or a script, you would use something like Python or Mel. So it would either be Maya CMDS or PyMel or even Open Maya API. But in some cases, even that doesn't cut it, right? So then you would have to use Maya C++ API, where you really need performance and access to much lower level data. Now, these are fairly advanced ways of solving technical problems or developing custom tools, which a typical artist is not really expected to know or solve. However, with Bifrost, I truly believe that it democratizes this development environment. It does so by giving us this new node based environment, a new paradigm, so to speak, where you can write entire programs and tools in a completely visual manner by just wiring together nodes, and these can then form more complex graphs or networks, which are called compounds. And then these compounds can be nested inside other compounds or other graphs, right? So you realize how deep this goes and how powerful this can be, right? And for many people who are already dealing with certain type of visual programming in their day-to-day work, be it look dev artists or surfacing texturing artists or effects artists or even compositors or even lighters, right? You would be dealing with a node-based environment in your work with some of the other applications out there. So Bifrost is no different than that. It gives you the same kind of node-based environment that you see in other applications, but in Maya, and gives you access to a very low-level data in Maya. And I truly believe that Bifrost offers something for everyone. Given that we have a good mix of audience members today, I hope this slide will actually help you kind of see what how Bifrost can help you. So for a typical artist, you can create non-destructive and procedural workflows where you can edit your graphs parameters and get a different result. And you could always revert to a previous result without worrying about blowing away your construction history. That would be typically a problem when you're dealing with your native Maya workflow. You can prototype ideas quickly in Bifrost. It doesn't really need a computer science degree. With some very basic knowledge of high school maths and a general understanding of logical operations, you can create a tool yourself, instead of waiting for somebody else or even waiting for Autodesk to develop something for you, right? With Bifrost, you can now just develop it yourself. And with Bifrost, it really becomes easy to share and collaborate your work with others. I'll give you a glimpse of how you can do this in a moment. This can really be handy even for leads or supervisors or show TDs. You can rapidly develop and deploy tools for your own teams on your shows. You can borrow tools from other shows and modify them for your shows without worrying about blowing away someone else's work. But at the same time, what's in it for a pipeline TD or a developer, right? So Bifrost actually offers you a complete plugin authoring environment. What you're essentially doing with graphs and compounds are you're creating custom Bifrost plugins that can also interface with data from Maya. You could get the data from other applications also in Alembic or VDBs, and you can process and massage them. And you can either use them in Maya itself in Bifrost, or you could again send them back to those applications in Alembic or VDB. You can treat these compounds as sort of modules that programmers would be familiar with. You can reuse these modules in other modules or in other graphs, right? So you can nest compounds inside compounds. And you can also implement your own solvers, right? So if there is an interesting paper that you saw in SIGGRAPH, right, or there is a interesting algorithm that you want to implement, you can do all of that entirely in Graph, right, without having to write a single line of code. And with Bifrost, we are in an entirely just-in-time compiled environment, which basically means that the Bifrost graph is compiled at runtime on the fly. So you should pretty much be able to achieve performance parity with C++ plugins for a lot of tasks. There is a caveat here though. Currently, because Maya has an older and a different architecture than Bifrost, which is much newer, there is a slight overhead when you have data I/O between Maya and Bifrost. So there might be some, overhead of round tripping this data, but this is the beginning. I'm sure things will improve a lot more as we move forward. And hopefully, sometime very soon in the near future, Bifrost will also allow us to develop our tools and plugins once in an environment like Maya and then deploy it in other applications like Max, right? Or even non-Autodesk products, maybe some real-time applications or other DCCs, right? So this is why I truly believe that Bifrost democratizes the development environment because now it allows for a greater connection, a greater synergy, and exchange of ideas and knowledge between artists and developers. You're essentially speaking the same language because all of you are now dealing in the same environment. You have a common node graph, you have a common visual language to speak about, right? And I also don't think the learning curve for artists who are not familiar with programming or math is very high. As I will show in some of the examples later during the presentation, some of the artists who are doing some of the best work in Bifrost are very non-technical people, in their own words. So all that is great, but how can we go about achieving this? So my intent today is to show you some examples which will cover some of the topics that I have mentioned. Hopefully, these examples would help demonstrate and make you aware of the power that you now have access to. The point of these examples are not to give you a step-by-step tutorial, so to speak, but to help you understand the access to the low-level power that you have in Bifrost, right? And if some of these examples seem a bit experimental, then they are experimental, because like I mentioned, with Bifrost you can quickly prototype ideas, so you can actually start brainstorming and jamming and do different kinds of cool experiments in Bifrost. As an artist myself, I have often realized that sometimes my greatest inspiration comes from very happy accidents, right? And I think a fully procedural environment allows you to have those sort of moments by experimenting with your node graphs without fear of blowing away your construction history or losing your data. Also, I've sped up the videos that will follow in interest of time, but I will pause and explain the process for you folks as much as I can. And if there are any specific questions, then you can always head over to the Q&A box, and Samit would be collecting the questions for a Q&A session after the session. So my first example that I'm showing here is basically a very simple case of checking for object penetration. Now, this can be something really useful for animation, right? So I have this animated character, and in a moment you will see that as it gets inside the box, it gets color coded in red. And you can kind of also see that there's this sort of a heat map, right, around the area where it's intersecting with the box. And you can see the points that are intersecting. Now, this is a very simple case. I say simple because I'm only checking for a closed convex surface. If it was a more complicated concave shape, then the logic involved to do this would be slightly more complicated. But let's start with a simple case, right? So out here, what I have is basically a, a graph which gets all the positions of the animated mesh and gets the positions of the box, right? Then I get the bounding box of the prop, which in this case is a cube. And then using this node called within bounds, I check whether each position of the animated mesh is inside the bounding box. If it is, then it will return me true or false, right? So using that true or false result, I then filter the points that are inside the box, and then I just draw them out as points. But I also check if any point is inside the box. So as soon as even a single point is inside the box, I then color code the mesh as red. So this can be a really useful example for animation and even for pipeline, where you could have something like this as a technical play blast, right? Where the animator can directly see in his viewport or in the play blast that there are penetrations, or the supervisor could check in play blast, right, that there are penetrations because we are color coding the entire character. And then you can either fix the animation itself, or you can ask your environment or props team to kind of relay out them. The next example is again a simple case where I am kind of drawing the silhouette points for the mesh. What you see here is on the top view is my short camera view, and the bottom view is a witness camera view, right? So this is a recreation of an example that you could do in PaintFX Toon before, where you could draw toon lines. Actually, Duncan Brinsmead from Autodesk has a much better variation of this on the area forums, so you should check out his example. For today's presentation, I've used my method. So what I'm essentially doing is I'm drawing the points that lie on the silhouette of the mesh as seen from the camera, right? So as you can see, so like here is something that can be useful again for animation. So typically animators like to see their silhouettes, right? They want to make sure that they're hitting the right poses in their animation. And in this scene, I don't have any lights. So if I hit 7, then it turns my mesh into black shading, right? So then I just see my outline points. So this can be a cool way of checking your silhouettes within viewport itself. uh, the way I do this is all again involving some very basic vector math, right? So I get the camera ray direction, the direction that the camera is pointing in, and then I compare that with the normals of all the points on the mesh, right? So typically, if you go into Maya's mesh display option and you switch on normals, you would see all the normals in the viewport. So this is the same data that you can access in Bifrost from Maya, right? So then I compare the angle between the camera ray direction and the mesh normals, right? And then based on a specific value that I am filtering into, I then decide whether I need those points or not. Now, typically, the points that are facing away from the camera, that's not interesting for us. The points that are facing directly towards the camera, they are not interesting for us either, right? So what I do is I get the angle between these points and I pass them into this within bounds node again, right? And this within bound node sort of acts like my range. So you can see that I've got a min bound and a max bound, right? So I've got 80 degrees and 110 degrees right now in this example, right? So I'm basically filtering for all the points where my angle between my mesh normal and my camera ray direction is between 80 and 110 degrees, right? Once I get those points, then I again isolate them and I construct my points, my point cloud and my strand objects. So this is a simple scenario, but if we take this a step forward, right, this is where then it starts getting interesting, right? So in this example, I've used the silhouette points, and along with a mask on specific parts of the geometry, I've basically created a trail, right? So here, what I'm doing is I'm getting the animated mesh from the uh, from the Maya session. And I have this node called compute velocity, which is again an out of the box node, right? So the velocity node basically gives you the per point motion vectors as they change in Maya per frame, right? So this is something similar to how you would use motion vectors in rendering. So once I get the velocity vectors, I then also pass them through a mask, right? So you will see in a moment that I have painted a specific portion of the geometry as a yeah. So yeah. So if you see this, I've painted basically this leg portion out here as white and rest of the body is black. So that's my mask because I'm interested only in drawing the trail points for this part of the mesh, right? So what I do is I get the silhouette points, I filter them based on whether they are inside the mask or not, and then I get the velocity for those points. So here I'm drawing the velocity as the color, right? So this, for those who are familiar in lighting and rendering, this pretty much looks like your motion vector renders, right? And then once I have filtered the silhouette points based on the velocity, so here you see the same silhouette example that I showed before. Now this is where things start getting interesting. This is an accumulate mesh compound. I must mention a note of thanks to Jason Lab for helping me with this. I was kind of getting stuck in this part of my workflow and was getting confused about things, and he shared a very quick example with me to help sort it out. So thank you, Jason. So here what I'm essentially doing is I'm storing the mesh per frame into a big list, and then based on the silhouette points that I'm interested in, I'm then getting the per frame silhouette points for each frame. You'll see that in a moment here. Yeah. So what I've done is drawn the per frame silhouette points for the leg, right? So you can see this is almost like Maya's ghosting or snapshot feature, right? So here I'm adjusting the action frame, so to speak. So this action frame is nothing but a parameter that I've set up to tell the system, the graph, to start storing the mesh from this frame onwards, right? And then I just kind of process those points, and then I build the trails in this compound. So once I have the per frame points for the legs, I take each frame's leg points and then I create a center out of it. I find the center point. Once I have the center point, I then connect all the center points across the frames, right, to get this line, this strand, right? And then what I do is for each strand, I again offset it along the strand's normals. So here I'm basically adding some fractal noise to the strands to get that sort of action, lightning action effect, a high speed, high velocity kick effect, right? So the number of strands that I need for my trail is the number of iterations that I will end up doing in this particular graph, right? So you can see here that currently I have about 30 or 50 iterations going on. So again, I'm just playing around with the frequency. I'm just playing around with some fractal parameters, right? So this is how you can start building on your simple examples. I started with a silhouette point, but this is where I've ended up, right? So you can use your previous ideas, reuse them, and then build something more complex progressively. And this is also something that's really cool that I'll kind of touch upon briefly. So what you see here is the new terminal node in Bifrost 2.2. This is a really awesome way of drawing your objects in viewport. So I have connected my trails to the diagnostic flag out here, slot here. So that's basically if you want to just see some stuff in the viewport for debugging, right? So I've turned it off so you don't see the trails anymore. So this is a really cool way of allowing your users to kind of turn off some information on and off in the viewport. Moving on, before I get into more examples, I would just like to touch upon the fact that you can share your compounds in Bifrost really easily. Here you see me copy pasting the compound into a text editor, and it's just regular, JSON text, which is really good for pipeline people. So if I copy that back and paste it into a Maya session, you'll see that it's the same compound again, right? So this is as simple as that, right? You can literally copy paste your compounds into an email or your studio's chat application and share it with your colleagues, right? The right way would be what I showed here, to publish it as a compound, which is slightly different. It's a little more structured and is meant to be a little more user friendly for pipeline. So once you have this, you can just hit tab and your compound should show up there, which is this, and then you can start using it again, right? So you see this small icon, diamond icon, once it's published. So just a quick note on how you can share your work, amongst your colleagues with Bifrost. Now something different. Here I'm basically showing you a procedural world building example. I must preface this by saying that at this point in Bifrost, you don't really have out of the box world building tools right away, but this shows you how you can actually build a tool yourself using the nodes that are already available in Bifrost. This example also kind of goes over something that's really nice in Bifrost. You see in outliner, I have multiple graphs out here, right? So I've basically broken up my entire graph into multiple subgraphs. So I've modularized my graph, so to speak. I've done this so that I don't have to recompute my entire graph every time I change one parameter. So for example, what I start off with is this init grid graph, which is nothing but just a Bifrost plane. Then I go into this Voronoi compute graph, right? So what I'm essentially doing is I'm just scattering some points on this mesh. And then for each point, scatter point, I'm finding its distance to all the other points on the plane, right? And then once I have those distances, I sort those distances based on how far or near they are. So you'll see that in a moment. Yeah, so this is the graph where I'm sorting all the points. I then pick the first point because the first one would be obviously the closest, right? And then based on the closest point, I then kind of group them and cluster them. For visual debugging purposes, I'm just transferring the color of the initial scatter point onto all those points which are closest to that scatter point, so which ends up looking like a Voronoi pattern. Now, this is where it actually starts getting interesting, right? Because with that Voronoi, I can pretty much do this sort of a displacement on my mesh. So the Voronoi has this distance feature, right? So I know my distance from the scatter point to all the other points which are in the same cell, right? So I store those distances on the mesh itself. Now this is again something that is an important point. When you break your graph into multiple subgraphs, then the most efficient way to transfer data around is by passing what Bifrost calls as objects, right? So these are amino objects, which are basically your geometry, your particles, your points, your strand type data. So they are represented by this blue port on a typical Bifrost graph or a node, right? So what I do is I take all the Voronoi stuff that I have calculated, so the Voronoi distance, the Voronoi seed, the Voronoi position, and I store it on the geometry itself, right? So I pass that geometry to the next graph, and then in the next graph, I read that back, and then I start displacing it, right? So the interesting thing here is that I've taken that distance data and I have piped it through some change range or evaluate F curve node. So this is a really nice and visual way of kind of changing or manipulating your data. So this kind of controls your distance in a spline way. Now this is the part where I actually get the mountain shape, right? The fall off ramp. So what I've basically done is I have calculated the fall off for this entire plane from the center, right? So the farthest points from the center, they will be black, and the closest points will be white. So sort of a ramp, circular ramp, right? So once I have this fall off, then I can basically use it to give me this mountain shape. You see here that if I disconnect it, it ends up displacing all my points evenly, right? So this is not as interesting. I mean, this is nowhere close to a mountain, right? But because I have that fall off, I can multiply that to then manipulate which points are displaced how much, right? So the points that are closer to the center, they will get displaced the most, and the points that are furthest away will get displaced the least. So this gives you this sort of a mountain effect for free. And the good part about this entire graph is I can go back to my Voronoi points graph and I can change the seed or the amount and I can get a different mountain immediately, right? The amount of Voronoi points here is almost like the number of peaks and valleys that you need. So the more points you have, the more peaks and valleys you get. Uh, this is this is a graph. This is the next graph where I'm computing a fractal noise. My previous version of this was using the fractal noise node, but I have switched to the fractal noise field since it came out in the new version. Here you see me visualizing the fractal noise field using the scope nodes, and I'm just kind of fiddling around with some parameters and changing the noise frequency and trying to make it look a little more interesting, and getting some interesting patterns. Now, what I eventually do with this fractal noise is I actually use this to get finer displacement on the mesh, right? So our previous version of the mesh was pretty smooth, and it's not interesting for a mountain surface, right? Now, yes, you can do this in shading also, but often you might want a lot more detail in the geometry itself. Like imagine if this was actually kilometers by kilometers big mountain, and you have a character, a mountaineer, or some sort of crowd army climbing these mountain shapes. Then you would want some kind of undulations on the mesh itself, right? You would not want that to be in your render time effect, right? So you could pretty much do that with noise patterns like this, right? So this adds that sort of a detail that I want. This is again a quick compound that I created in Bifrost. For example, often this you would have the people who are coming from a shading or look dev background may have seen this in their renders also. Often when you displace the mesh a lot, then you start seeing some cracks in your geometry, right? So what I've done here is I've basically created this fast blur normals compound, which basically averages the normals, in a given specific radius or amount, And once I use the blur normals, then it kind of smooths out my normals that I'm going to use for displacement, right? So it solves the crack problem, and I can change the displacement amount to kind of get more noisy effect. The next one is where things start getting really interesting, right? So this is again a graph that takes my displaced mesh and then computes erosion points out of it, right? Again, my point here is not to be scientifically accurate and use the right math for calculating hydraulic erosion. I'm trying to kind of go for something that is visually interesting and can be done with some simple vector math. So what I'm doing here is I'm scattering some points on the displaced mesh, and then for each point on the mesh that I've scattered, I get the normal, tangents, and binormals directions, right? And then once I have those vectors, then I can basically advect my points. I can advect my positions and manipulate them in interesting ways. So here, what you see is I've basically used only binormals, I believe, to kind of visualize my direction vectors. So you get these interesting swirly patterns, right? So these can be used as contour lines, right? Although there is a much better example by Jonah Friedman from Autodesk in the recent Bifrost 2.2 webinar, where he showed a really cool way of using fields to generate these kind of contours, right? I've kind of interpolated them with norm with tangents slightly to get a little more interesting result. I also have a curl field here. If I turn on the curl field, you'll see that it gives me these very wispy looking interesting swirls, right? Obviously, I don't want this to be used for my direction vectors, for my erosion vectors. So I mix in a small amount to kind of break up the pattern in a more interesting ways. But you could actually do something more interesting with the curl patterns, right? So for example, typically when the water is kind of flowing down an altitude like this, it would eventually start pooling at the areas where the geometry is relatively flat, right? So you could use some compounds in Bifrost to kind of get the inclination of a point, and you can decide whether the point is flat or it's steep, right? And based on that, you can actually have those points use the curl noise more than the others, right? So you can get cool erosion patterns on the flatter surfaces, which kind of will show you the water pooling effect in those areas, right? For now, I've just kind of mixed in a little bit of curl noise into this. Uh, what I do with this information is I basically uh, take the vector for every point, and then I add it to the current position. I Once I have the new position, I then get the new vectors for that position as well, and then I add them back to this new position, right? So I do this a few number of times in this iterate node. So the more iterations I have, the more advection I'm causing, right? The more the points are stepping forward in that direction. I have an example of what I mean by iterate in a moment, right? But for now, if we just carry on with this example, I eventually collect all these advected points. I create strands out of them. Typically, if I want to get very fine detail erosion, then I would need to increase my number of erosion points a lot, right? So I need to do more substeps to my iterations, but that can get expensive. Instead, I use a cheaper solution. I just resample those strands. Resample is sort of like how you rebuild a curve in Maya, where you can add more spans to your curve. So resample is essentially doing that. I resample the curves, reproject them back onto the mesh, and then now I have more points, right? And here what you see is I take the closest point to my erosion points on the mesh, and then I color that as white, right? So wherever I have erosion, that's white. So this becomes like an erosion mask, right? So I'm going to use this mask in this next graph, where I basically displace my geometry based on the erosion mask, right? So typically when you see eroded surfaces, you would see these kind of artifacts on the mesh, right? What happens is the water flows over these surfaces and it chips away the mass in those areas, right? So I'm basically displacing my mesh inwards, right? Or downwards rather, right? Not along the normals. and I'm using the mask to figure out where I need to do that kind of a displacement, right? So all of this then gives you this sort of an erosion look, right? And you can change the parameters at any point of time and get a different erosion going, right? And since this is entirely in graph, I can actually go back to my Voronoi points graph or node, and I can kind of, compute new points, right? So here you see that I change the seed and I get an entirely different looking mountain shape, right? And because I have changed the mountain shape, all of my displacements and erosions are calculated again, right? So I immediately get the right erosion for the current shape of the mountain, right? So this can be a really powerful way of generating different variations of your asset in a very short amount of time, right? So if you had a terrain shot which had a lot of these peaks and mountains, right, you could immediately generate multiple variations by just changing a few parameters, right? So if I change the number of points, then it gives me more peaks or valleys. Yeah. This example is also a terrain example, but here I'm kind of creating a canyon or a caves type of a system, right? Like the previous example, this is also created entirely in Bifrost. My starting point is a cube. I just convert the cube into volumes. I then create some voxel fields. I use some noise fields. I do some addition, subtraction, multiplication for those fields. I convert those fields back into mesh, and then once I have that mesh, I kind of rigify them. This rigify compound that I have is nothing but, again, based on some Voronoi cells. I'm getting some vectors or distances, and here I'm kind of eroding the surface along its contour lines, right, which ends up giving me this sort of a canyon look. This is just a quick look dev test that I did with Arnold. Obviously, the geometry is entirely created with Bifrost. The textures are very basic procedural textures within Arnold. So this is entirely procedural. There's no hand painted textures in this. I mean, it's not a great look dev example, but I just thought I'll share a WIP look with you. So quick note about loops and iterate. I talked a lot about them in my previous examples. Now, what do I mean by loops and iterate? So here you see two examples. This on the left is basically a typical loop. For those coming in from a programming background, you would be already familiar with these concepts. So it may not be that difficult for you. For those who do not have any programming background, this is pretty much what loops and iterate nodes do. Again, I'm oversimplifying this a lot. So for the programming people on this session today, please forgive me. uh, the first one shows sort of a for each loop example. So if you have an input like a circle or a sphere, you do something with it, you process it in some way, and you get an output like a box or a cube, right? And you store that in this list, right? So that is what typically you would do with a for each loop, right? With an iterate, things start getting more interesting, right? So you do the same thing as you would do in a for each loop, but then you can also get the result back as your starting point for the next iteration, right? So here I have my circle or sphere getting processed into this cube or box, and then I can use this box as my starting point for my next iteration, right? So then basically I get a different result the next time, right? And I can keep doing this for the number of times I'm iterating this loop in, right? And my box is also stored in the list, right? So I can do the same thing that I did with loops, but I could kind of process the data over itself, so to speak. So this is a really powerful concept that you can use to create a lot of different kinds of procedural effects in Bifrost. This example is a little silly and fun example of how I can do procedural animation in Bifrost. I call this character Mr. Legs. It's nothing fancy, it's just a bunch of points which are connected as Bifrost strands. What you see here is a locator which is geometry constrained to the mesh, to the plane mesh, right? So that as I move the locator, it moves along the surface. What you just saw is basically me changing the number of legs and kind of changing the height of the character with that offset node. offset parameter. It's a very simple graph. Again, what I do is I get the locator position in Bifrost and I get the closest point for that position. And then I also get the normal at that closest position, and I move this point along its normal, right? So then that becomes my head point. And then for my head point, I get all the closest leg points. So that's again similar to what we did before, where I'm basically sorting the distances to those points, and I am kind of deciding how many points I want. You can see a bit of that over here. So I get all the distances to the head point, and then I sort them. And once I've sorted them, what I do is I use a slice array. Now, those coming in from programming background would know what slicing does, right? So it allows you to kind of take a list and then extract only a portion of the data from that list, right? So this is what the slice array node in Bifrost does as well. I've just used the endpoint of the slice as my number of legs, right? So the more slices I have, the more legs I get. And then I've just connected those points with the head point using the strands node, and I just draw them as these thick strands in the viewport. So again, a quick fun example of how you could do procedural animation. Obviously, this is not something that you would use in production in this manner, but imagine if this was like a spider or a creepy crawler, then you could totally use this to kind of procedurally animate it over a surface. This also shows you how I've combined geometry constraint and Bifrost, right? So I've just geometry constrained the locator to the mesh, and then that allows me to use that in Maya without having to calculate the constraint on the mesh in Bifrost itself. So you can combine these ideas together. This is again a similar example uh, where I basically have a locator, and if I move that locator around in the viewport, this terrain that you see here is the same terrain that we generated in the previous graph. I've just read it as an alembic here, and as I move the locator, you see the points moving away from the locator, or they are getting generated in different areas of the mesh. So that is being done again through some node graph trickery in Bifrost. What I do is I basically get the distance of all the points from this locator, right? I'll show that in a moment out here. Yeah. So this is showing you a black and white mask that I generate on the fly. So you will also see a different version of this mask. Hopefully I can find that. Yeah, so out here you see that my mask is the closest points are black and the furthest points are white, right? And then what I do is I basically clamp this mask, right? So I clamp it to get this sort of a hard edge, right? So this becomes my input mask to my scatter positions. Now there's something really interesting that I want to talk about here, and this will help you guys to optimize your workflows when you're working in Bifrost. Now, on the scatter node itself, you have the feature to plug in a mask, right? So I can plug in that mask live on my scatter node, but you will see in a moment why I have used a different method, right? So there is this condition called switch methods, right? If I switch that condition off and I start moving my locator, you will see that the points update in a very slow manner. That's because my graph, my mask is getting updated every time I move the locator, and those updated mask values are being passed to the scatter node on the fly, and then the scatter node has to recompute itself because it has got a new set of mask values to generate the points from, right? So this is why this ends up being slower than the method which I have used, right? So what I have done is I have basically scattered the points over the entire surface, right? And then based on the mask, so here you can see that my points are actually on the entire surface. And then based on the mask, I simply get the information of whether the point is in the white area or in the black area. Depending on my result, I gather all the points that are in the black area and I eventually delete those points, right? So which is why this method runs much faster than directly plugging the mask into your scatter node, right? So where I'm going with this is eventually I need this to construct me a path from each point to my target locator,
right? Now, as you can see here, once I connect those, I get these path vectors, but they are not interesting because they are just straight and they are going through the mesh. What I actually want these paths to be are curves along the surface of the terrain, right? So I could do that in more complicated ways, but here I've just used a cheaper and quicker method. I've just resampled those strands and I've reprojected them back onto the mesh. So then I get this very cool looking path from each point to the target locator, right? And based on the number of points that I resample, I get a much denser strand. Now, this is abstract and cool, but where do I actually use this? So I can combine this idea and my procedural animation idea and do something like this, right? So this is entirely in graph. Now the terrain that I have used here, this is an older example when I did not have my terrain builder in Bifrost. So I used Gaia at that point in time, but everything else is in Bifrost, right? So what I did was I did the same scatter points away from the locator example that I just showed, and I constructed all the paths to this target. And then for each scatter point, I generated my Mr. Legs character procedurally. And then based on the path for that point, I advected my Mr. Legs character on its path towards the target, right? So this shows you how you can actually combine simpler ideas into more complex effects, right? And this is entirely procedural. There's no hand animation in this at all, or even no hand modeling of the paths for the crowd characters. Moving on to something different, I mentioned in my initial section that for developers, you could also implement entire solvers in Graph in Bifrost, right? So this kind of goes over that. I've referenced a paper here, which is the follow the leader algorithm. This was published in SIGGRAPH a few years ago. This is a pretty cool way of actually simulating your curves without stretching them. So it maintains the length of the curves. So here you can see that I have an initial curve, which is this red strand. That's sort of my rest pose. And then I have some noise vectors applied on it. It's just procedural noise in Bifrost, which is acting as sort of a wind force. And the blue circles that you see, they are my constraints, right? They are the limits or the boundaries of how far my point can move. Each point can move, right? So that's just a visual drawing that I have created to help me debug the scene. And as you can see, no matter how big my force is, my points, my strands get simulated, but they are not stretching, right? So they maintain their length, right? So it's a really nice example of how you can implement complex papers in Bifrost entirely in Graph without having to touch C++ at all and still get the same performance. I expand on that example in this. Again, this is sort of an abstract setup. It's kind of a alien grass field tool with some flower buds at the end. Uh, this is again a procedural setup done entirely in Bifrost. I just generate some points on the plane mesh based on the normals of the points on the mesh. I create my strands. I then apply some noise force vectors on these strands, and you can see here how I can dynamically change the input parameters and get a different result in real time, right? So this is really an effective way of generating different variations of your asset and see it update live without having to redo a lot of steps manually. I've added some controls for the noise to make it look like it's underwater, or it can be a little more high frequency noise. So here you see that I'm just playing around with the noise parameters. And here I've turned off preserve length. And if I increase my force magnitude, you'll see that my strands start distorting. But if I preserve the length, then no matter how high my forces are, my strands remain the same length, right? So this is using the same algorithm that we had implemented in the previous graph. And all of this is obviously deeply tied to Arnold and Maya. So you can change your asset live and see it update in your Arnold render view or the Arnold viewport in Maya, right? So here I've passed around some color data from Bifrost to the Arnold strands. So you can also see how this can be effective for look dev, right? So you can actually manipulate your final look dev based on your Bifrost graph, right? And see it update real time. Or you could generate more variations, right? Uh, Even in shading using Bifrost. This is another example that I did recently, which uses the latest features in Bifrost 2.2. So here I have a hair system on the plane, a default hair system. And I've basically taken the output curves of the hair system and imported it into Bifrost. So you can just drag and drop curves from Maya into Bifrost now, and they will show up as Bifrost strands. And what I do is I get the strand points and I instance this cone on those strand points, right? So this is a really cool example that shows you how you can combine different workflows in Maya to generate something entirely new, right? So I am using the classic NHair solver in Maya, which is your regular Maya workflow, but I'm then pushing it through Bifrost to generate some instances, right? So I had actually created this setup over a decade ago for a Disney Planes franchise where we had these large cornfields, right? But because these cornfields would get very dense and would cover very large areas, we did not want them to be inefficient when rendering. So at that point in Maya, we didn't unfortunately have these kind of solutions. So I relied on Peter Shipkov's excellent soup nodes for Maya back then. Now we have same features in Maya with Bifrost, so I just recreated that setup here. So in my example in production, what I essentially did was I instanced the con mesh, the con cobs on each of the strand points, right? So the con mesh itself does not need to deform per frame, right? Which is really cool because then you can use the power of instancing at render time, because all the con is doing is it's translating and rotating based on the curves orientation, which is then manipulated by your NHair simulation, right? So I get the power of simulated curves, but also the power of instancing, where I can just instance any rigid surface on this curve. You could also use this for some interesting rigging and CFX or TechAnim effects. If you have like a alien transformer robotic alien creature with a tail setup, your tail setup could be based on your regular dynamic curve setup that most people use. But then you could instance your hard objects, your actual models on the curve, right, and have them not deform. They can remain rigid, and you can shape them based on how you shape your curves. This is pretty much my last example. This is again something experimental which I just kind of did recently. This is sort of a groom generator that I'm building in Bifrost. In this current example, I'm just creating some weird alien egg looking thing with some red parasitic growth on it. This is all again in graph. I just have a sphere input from Maya. Again, I use my update mesh vectors compound to kind of create all the normals and tangents and binormals data. I then take all of those vectors and I mix them in interesting ways. So I put some fractal noise, I use a lot of fields, I kind of blend between those fields, I blend normals with tangents and binormals. So a lot of processing that you would do even in something like shading, right? So if you were doing this in something like XGen or Yeti, or you were doing this in some other software, you would kind of do a similar thing where you are just mixing in different noise patterns. So this again is a very simple use case, obviously, but I am going to explore this further and kind of try to do a more production centric grooming tool with this concept. Right. So here you see me visualizing some data with the new terminal node. So I can basically draw my seed points, my initial scatter points, right? And I can also kind of draw my vectors that I'm using to advect my strands and use them in interesting ways. So here what I've done is I've taken the field noise, the fractal noise that I have, and I've kind of visualized them as points, right? And I've manipulated the size of those points slightly. So these become my parasitic looking you know things that I've latched on to the hair surfaces. Yeah. So again, like I said in the beginning, you can experiment a lot in Bifrost because it's completely procedural, and you can come up with really interesting stuff, which can be happy accidents that you are not planning to do, but they can give you some interesting results and kind of push the work that you're doing. Uh, In this section, I would like to plug some of my fellow Bifrosters who have been a huge source of inspiration to me. Maxime is an amazing guy. He has made his MJCG compounds completely free on area forums for a long time. It's one of the best compounds that you can use today in Bifrost, along with the Autodesk's official Rebel pack. So if you're starting in Bifrost today, you must download his free MGCG compounds. Maxime also does a lot of helpful articles on his website. He has an amazing article on Bifrost strands. He is a strand expert from his XSI ICE days, and he's doing a lot of new interesting strand tools in Maya. You can see his L system prototype here and his veining prototype here. Phil Radford, also popularly known as Maya Guy, is another amazing artist that I follow very closely. Uh, he posts a lot of video tutorials on Bifrost as well, and Phil is actually a perfect example of something I was talking about at the beginning of my session. Phil himself has mentioned it multiple times in his videos that he is not a technical person, that he does not know math enough. But if you see his videos on YouTube or Vimeo or his social media, he produces some of the most amazing looking results in Bifrost currently. So you see a extremely dense MPM snow simulation on top. This is again a weird strand effect that he did recently, which is completely art directable. So based on wherever you move your input locator or sphere position, it will kind of move the strands over there. Uh, he's done a lot of his work actually got featured in the Bifrost 2.2 official video uh, uh, recently. So you see he's done a lot of these interesting looking effects simulations in Bifrost, which are completely in graph, and this is by a person who claims that he's not technical at all, right? So this shows you how even as an artist you can create some very powerful procedural effects in Bifrost. Bruce Lee is another god level guru. He has posted massive amounts of interesting examples on area forums. He shares a lot of his files and his process in his YouTube videos as well. Here you see an ocean example that he did a while ago, where he uses Bifrost to kind of shape the way the ocean looks, and then he passes it through the Bifrost ocean simulation system to kind of also get the particles going on top. You must follow him on YouTube and Twitter and all his social media handles for a lot of cool stuff. In fact, just last night, he has posted some really nice examples of the new Bifrost version and how you can use that for procedural world building. Jason Lab is another excellent rigger, TD, and artist. He recently actually did a great webinar along with Enrique from One Animation for Autodesk on how they are using Bifrost and rigging an animation. Again, something very interesting, which is not FX, right? So follow him on his social media. He does a lot of cool stuff in open processing, and he's actually porting over some of his examples into Bifrost now, which is really, really interesting. So it also kind of shows you the power of Bifrost, where you can, if you find something interesting online in another software or in another uh, programming language, right, you can pretty much recreate that in Bifrost. Paul Smith is again a legend from the Softimage XSI ICE days. He is actually creating or recreating rather a lot of his XSI ICE setups in Bifrost now. So if you are somebody who's completely new to Bifrost, I highly recommend you check out his Vimeo videos. It is quite detailed, and he goes through a lot of beginner steps on how to create some procedural deformation setups in Bifrost. Roland is actually an Autodesk employee, but he posts a lot of interesting videos on his personal YouTube channel. I watch his videos very closely. He has done some amazing masterclasses in the past and even recently about Bifrost as a visual programming platform. Again, if you're starting out in Bifrost, you must follow him and watch all his videos. They are extremely detailed, and he's actually my regular go-to guy for. I keep checking his videos as a reference point if I forget something or if I want to know something in Bifrost. There's a lot of resources that are coming up on Bifrost online now. Autodesk has created this new centralized hub for Bifrost, which is makeanything.autodesk.com/Bifrost. This is supposed to be the new centralized place where you can find all the information related to Bifrost. It has sublinks to all the previous sites that also have Bifrost related content, like the forums and documentation and whatnot. But this is a nice single place where you can access all of that. Autodesk also recently did this promo event called 12 Days of Bifrost, which was really interesting and very helpful for people who are starting out in Bifrost. So for each day in this event, you get a different set of articles to help you kind of get started. So I would highly recommend people check this out as well. And we have a new Slack user group called Bifrost Addicts. So some of us very enthusiastic Bifrost users got together and we started this user chat group on Slack called Bifrost Addicts. There is the link here. The link is set to expire every 30 days. So if you are not able to use it, just hit me on social media and I can share a new link with you. There's a lot of interesting discussions in this group already. We actually grew to over 100 members in just a few hours. So we were not expecting that sort of response and interest at all. So it is a nice indication of how people are excited about Bifrost. And lastly, as a closer to this session, I wanted to share a crowd setup I built a couple of nights ago in Bifrost. The setup is still WIP and a mess, so I haven't really done a breakdown of it yet. So I'm just showing you the rendered output. And in a way, this is my applause for the Bifrost development and support team for the excellent work that they are putting into Bifrost, which is actually helping push Maya forward in an entirely new age. But this is again entirely in Bifrost. I'm just using some Alembic motion cycles. I downloaded them for free from Mixamo, but you could use anything. You could use Rococo or whatever else that you like. I got the motion cycles, I exported them as Alembic, and then I processed them in Bifrost to give me time offset uh, alembics for each of the motion cycles. And then I just converted some of the edge points on the stadium mesh into curves. I passed those curves into Bifrost and used them as the instance source points. And then I instance the offset alembic meshes onto each of those points. Right. Obviously, this is not ready for prime time yet. You can see some obvious penetration for some of these guys and you can see some obvious repetition in the motion. I probably need a larger and longer library of animation cycles. But this does give you a sneak peek into what you can do with Bifrost today, right? For things like stadium crowd, where you don't really have any locomotion, you can do this entirely in graph. I'm probably going to expand on this to also include locomotion eventually. But yeah, this is where I end my session. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you found some value in what I have shared today. There's obviously a lot more that I'll continue to share with the community, so watch this space. I think we can move on to Q&A now, Samit.
Absolutely, Sachin, and thank you so much for this lovely presentation. There's so much to know what Bifrost can do, and it's an eye opener for a lot of people, including me as well. Where we used to think that Bifrost is primarily used only for liquids and fluid simulations and all, but there are so much other things which can be done using Bifrost and with a very easy procedural workflow. And also knowing that you don't need to be a technical guy or a developer, wherein an artist can do so much, is really a great thing and an eye opener for all of our audiences today who's attending this session. So thank you so much, Sachin, once again. Before we open to Q&A, I would just like to, also say that we're going to have two more questions as a poll question where you guys, it will be great if you guys can answer them for us. It will help us to make our upcoming webinars more interesting and customized based on your request. So, Sachin, there's two questions which has been, the first question is from Kumar Abhishek. He is asking, like, sir, how is it better than real flow? How is Bifrost better than real flow?
Yeah, right. So, like I said in my intro, since I've kind of been working in this industry for a while now, as you kind of grow your experience, you realize that comparing software is like is a futile effort. I think each software has its own strengths and weaknesses, and I would not like to say X is better than Y or Y is better than Z. I think it depends on the problem that you're trying to solve, and if RealFlow is the solution for a problem that you're solving in your current project, then that's the solution you use. If Bifrost is the solution that is the better solution for your problem, then that's the one you use. In terms of uh, if I would answer that question in a different manner of what can Bifrost do that RealFlow cannot, right? From a technical point of view. Now, I'm not an FX guy, and there might be better people on this panel today or the audience who know more about fluid simulation than me. But Bifrost is essentially giving you a procedural platform, right? A completely new paradigm of working. So the fact that you can access data at such a low level in graph can make your fluid simulation more powerful as well, because then you can manipulate your data from the fluid solver and then you could process it in a different way. For example, in the Bruce Lee example of where he created his ocean setup in Bifrost, right? So he's passing data from Bifrost, from his actually deformer setup to the ocean solver in Bifrost, right? So you can do a lot of those kind of hybrid effects in Bifrost. I'm not entirely familiar with RealFlow as a user. I have integrated it in pipeline before, but again, I think every software has their strengths. So you would be a better judge of the kind of problem you're trying to solve and what tool would suit that problem in that situation more.
Correct. And even I would like to add something on top of what Sachin said. Is like, again, like, you can depend on other softwares or third-party plugins, but if
Right.
you really want to look at an ROI, and as Sachin said that, you can do a lot of things on both the softwares. But remember one thing, Bifrost, if it can do what you want to do, the advantage would be it's available within Maya. So you don't have
Right.
to again jump to another tool or a plugin or something like that. And
Well,
also,
right.
yeah, go ahead, Sachin.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, one thing that you could do is you could even combine the two applications, right? For those of you in the audience, you might have already faced this problem in the past. I did in Pipeline, where because RealFlow mesh topology changes every frame, or it changes it at a specific point between frames, you end up, getting motion blur issues, right? So you could actually take your mesh cache from RealFlow, bring it into Bifrost in Maya, and then you could reprocess that mesh and you could actually build a more stable mesh. I showed you the compute velocity example, right? So you could actually get the velocity vectors from the RealFlow mesh, and then you could generate a more stable velocity vector so that your motion vectors look nice and they are more stable and they don't give you weird motion blur results in at the rendering stage, right? So you could combine these workflows in interesting ways as well. It does not always have to be A over B all the time, right? In fact, in today's day and age, I would actually ask everyone to learn everything that they can. If you have enough time in the world, then try to learn as much as you can. You learn X software, Y software, Z software, right?
Correct, correct. Great, great. So yeah, we have the second question from Kanishk Chauhan who says, for the daisy chain, do you simply drag the last Bifrost node into the new one, or do you do some connections in the node editor?
Right. Hey, hi Kanish. Nice to see you here. For daisy chaining, yes, you can do it both ways. If you're doing this quickly, then you would typically just drag and drop this into the Bifrost graph editor, and it would create the connection for you. If I am creating multiple connections into my graph from multiple previous graphs, then I sometimes just create the object value input parameters and I go into the node editor or the connection editor and do the connections manually. So you can do both. Dragging and dropping it into Bifrost graph editor directly is a lot quicker. So that's something I would suggest if you're doing something on the fly in Maya and are just prototyping things.
Perfect. Cool. Thank you so much, Sachin. And there was like these were the two questions which people have asked. I'm running a poll question, guys. And this would help us, as I mentioned, would be great if you answer them. It would help us really work on our upcoming webinars. Now, in case if some of you guys still have some questions, and I can see some of you guys raising hands, it would be great if you can just put it on the chat box, and Sachin and I would be more than happy to answer them. All right, there is a question from Nand Roy. Can we create
Feather,
father also?
feather.
Okay, okay, yeah, sorry.
Feather.
Yeah.
Right. So yes, you can create feathers also. If you you guys can still see my screen.
No, I'm running a poll question.
Okay.
Wait, I'll just, okay, just, so there's 51% have voted. If we can just wait for a couple of
Yeah.
seconds,
I'll
Sachin.
just talk about
Yeah,
it. So yeah, Nand, you
yeah.
can create feathers in Bifrost also, but right now you may not have out of the box tools to do it. But there are examples that people are already doing online. You can check the area forums or some of the social media platforms. For example, Maxime, who I referenced in my slide, he's doing this interesting L system in Bifrost. Uh, Technically, you could use that to also create a feather system, right? So you can do it currently not out of the box maybe, but yes, you can do it on your own. You can create a graph which actually generates feather for you. The grooming example that I showed in my session, I am planning to build that further and eventually create a feather system as well out of it. So yeah, watch this space for whenever I release an update to that. And there are other users who are also doing this already.
Great, great, great. So, yeah, Sachin, you want to share your screen? You can.
Yeah, sure.
I quickly remember there was one more ad commercial. I forgot the name of the product, but it was a turkey bird, which the entire feather was created in Bifrost using Bifrost.
Right.
And that's the making of that video, I guess, is still on YouTube. I would try and share the link on the chat box. Yeah.
Right. So can you see this screen, this page that's playing?
Yes.
Yeah. So this example by Maxime shows a L system that he built in Bifrost, right? So these are basically curves. These are basically curves growing from other curves, right? That's essentially what a feather is, right? It's curves growing from curves, right? So you can build your own feather system as well in Bifrost,
Correct.
right? Do we have more questions?
I need to check once again. Give me a second. Meanwhile,
For the audience, I know I had to kind of blaze through a lot of examples. Sped up the videos and there was a lot to cover, but I hope that a lot of it made sense to you. And it's just about taking the step and kind of starting on your journey with Bifrost, really. Once you start this journey, it's actually pretty addictive, which is why we named the Slack group as Bifrost Addicts, because it kind of keeps you awake at night when you're trying to think of different solutions and solving problems procedurally. It gets very interesting very quickly.
correct. So there is two more. There are two more questions. One is from Omi Joshi, and he wants to know that what if we want to create a flame or some kind of volcano effect? Can we do that in Bifrost? Is there any plugins for Bifrost? If I'm not wrong, Sachin sir, you have worked with Prana Studios, right? Yes,
Yes.
Sachin, this is for you. Yeah.
Thank you, Omi, for the question. Yes, I worked with Prana Studios in the past. Yes, you can totally create a flame or volcano effect in Bifrost. Some of the examples that I showed towards the end of other users in Bifrost, like Bruce Lee or Phil, they are doing some interesting simulation examples as well. So you should check them out. There's a lot of examples on the Autodesk YouTube channels also where there are examples of explosions and volumes. Actually, if I'm not wrong, the Bifrost content browser already comes with a flame setup that you can use out of the box, and you can tweak parameters. Volcano effect again is something that you could do easily with Bifrost. You could have lava type, simulation done in Bifrost. Uh, is that something that you can do out of the box? Yes, you can start with an example as a starting point, and then you can start building on top of it, right? Like everything in FX, a lot of times it's not about just dragging and dropping a shelf tool and then creating an effect, right? You have to customize it for your shot, right? You have to kind of put in the time and the effort to know what the simulation should look like, to know how the solver should behave, to understand what's the right physics behind this kind of an effect. On those points, Bifrost is extremely capable because the solvers are extremely high quality, and they are pretty physically accurate, as most other solvers are in other softwares as well. But you can at the same time art direct them heavily, right? So I have no doubt that you can create volcanic effect in Bifrost.
Correct, correct, correct. Yeah, and the content library is really a great thing for the new users who really want to start off with something which has already been set up and just customize them
Right.
and maybe change the look and feel or add or subtract something which really will be a great help.
And as users,
Arvind has
as
sorry,
just
go
one
ahead.
point that I would like to add, as users, what can really help Bifrost developers as well as the community in general is, for example, if you went ahead and asked the same question in the area forums, right? So then I'm sure there would be a lot of people, even other Bifrost users, not just Autodesk support teams, but there would be a lot of users who can chime in and help you with a simple example, right? Of showing you how to do stuff, similar to how I showed some of my examples, right? So please don't hesitate from actually going into the area forums and asking how you could do a certain kind of effect, and I'm sure somebody will, help you out.
Absolutely correct. Arvind has a question. He's like, can we cache or make the compute result between the graph flow, or does my flow computes from scratch every time?
Right. So that's a very interesting question. Actually, which is why I broke up my graphs into multiple graphs in my mountain terrain example. So if you have everything in one graph, then some portions of it are cached, I guess, but Bifrost natively doesn't have a cache. Like most of the draw calls, like if you're just drawing points or if you're just drawing strands, the draw part is usually cached. So if you change the size of the points in viewport or the size of the strands in viewport, that will not force it to recompute the entire graph. But if you change something in the geometry itself, then that may trigger a recompute of the entire graph. That's exactly the reason why I actually broke up my mountain terrain setup into multiple graphs, right? So that I can first create my, let me switch my screen to that example. You can still see my screen, right?
We can, Sachin.
Yeah. So in this example, you see that I have these multiple graphs in Outliner, right? So my initial terrain grid just computes the plane. My next just computes the Voronoi points. The next one takes those Voronoi points and displaces the plane based on that information. Then I compute the fractal. Then I take the fractal information, then displace the mesh in the next graph. Then I compute the erosion. Once I have the erosion points in the next graph, I displace the mesh based on those erosion points, right? So I did that because then what I am essentially doing is I am letting Maya's DG evaluation take over, right? So each graph is now evaluated separately. So then as long as I don't dirty each graph by changing its input parameters, that graph will remain cached. So that's when Maya's regular DG mechanics takes over, and it allows you to cache portions of your graph. without recomputing the entire scene. I hope that made sense.
Absolutely. Yep. All right. I think Sachin, we don't have any more questions. So we're good to go and fantastic. I'm like, thanks a lot for keeping the audience engaged so well. And I hope a lot of you guys have learned a lot from today's session as well. And if you guys have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me or Sachin or anyone from the Autodesk team, and we'll be more than happy to help you out. If you want to know more about Bifrost, definitely there is area.autodesk.com, which will have a lot of resources, you guys, and tutorials as well. There are also some compounds which you can download. If you are an artist, you're a little bit scared of, starting something from scratch, which you don't know about. You can just install the compound and then learn about these nodes individually and how does it work. And that's a good learning curve. I did it myself, and I can say that it works really well. I can just see one question popping up. All right, we have time for some one or two more questions. One is from Abhishek Das. Can the objects which are colliding with the liquid simulation behavior accordingly, like in case of water bodies coming in city? Okay, she's like talking about those
Yeah,
flush
giant.
of water in
Yeah,
the city.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, you can do all those. Actually, that's something that is the bread and butter of Bifrost, I guess. That's something
yeah,
that has already been good at for many years now. The water solver in Bifrost is one of the most advanced and quite fast actually, in terms of the amount of points that it can handle and the kind of complexity it can handle. So I'm not sure if somebody has done this specific example. You may find actually other Bifrost users or studios who may have done this sort of an example where the entire city is getting a deluge of a huge ocean wave or a flood or like a tsunami. But yes, it should be possible. In fact, again, referencing Bruce Lee, in his example, the ocean wave was pretty huge. So if you just take that and kind of start, doing a water simulation of that whole mass of ocean wave crashing onto buildings, then you get your tsunami effect, right? So yes,
yeah.
it should be possible.
And last question from Kalpesh, our friend, he is asking, can we simulate on network?
Yes, so I believe this basically is ask this question is about whether we can simulate this run batch simulations of Bifrost. Yes, you can totally do that. I'm not sure the specifics of what the Maya licensing is for Bifrost, but I think you get 5 batch nodes for
Five.
free.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
correct, correct. With the
yeah.
standalone Maya, you get 5. With the collection, you get 15.
Right. So you can run for each Maya license that you have, you can run Bifrost simulations on 5 different machines, right? Or did
Correct,
you
correct.
mean, or maybe he meant if the same simulation can be distributed across different machines at the same time on network. I think he might have
Yeah,
meant that actually, distributed simulation.
like a
That's
batch
some,
rendering kind of a process.
yeah, but essentially simulating the same frame across different machines. I'm not sure about that. I don't think you can at this point. Uh, Maybe a Bifrost developer can actually answer this on the area forum for you, but I think I'm pretty sure it cannot do that at this point.
Yeah. So we'll understand more about this question, Kalpesh. We can have a chat, and then based on the exact question, we can get the answer from either the area forum or the for the developers directly.
Right.
All right, cool. I think we are good with time, and we don't want to take the audience's busy schedule day. But thank you so much, guys, for being so attentive and having make this session extremely successful. And I would like to also thank Sachin a lot. You've really been very kind enough. We have disturbed you a lot in odd hours for coordinating during this session. But thank you so much, Sachin. And we would really like to have some more sessions with you, more detailed ones on any other topic which you would be more happy to do it with us.
No, absolutely. My pleasure, Samit. I've been really excited about Bifrost, and I think it is. I mean, people really have to realize the kind of power it's bringing to you at your doorstep. It is, I think, the next leap forward in Maya's future. And hopefully, more sessions like this by me or other Bifrosters will continue to grow the community. And thank you everyone for tuning in. It's a production day, so thank you for your time.
Great, great, great. So with that, guys, we would like to end this webinar today. And just to keep a health check, I hope you guys are safe and everyone in this group and your closed ones are doing good and safe. So take care. Stay tuned for some upcoming webinars in the future and hope to see you guys soon. So once again, Sachin, thank you so much for being with us today.
Absolutely. Pleasure.
Thank you. Bye, guys. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you, Sachin.
Thank you.